Hey everyone, welcome back to the next of my videos. Today I'm going to be doing a deep dive review on the webinar platform called WebinarNinja. I'm going to be telling you everything I loved about it, the things I didn't really like about it, and also who I think it is perfect for if you do want to host webinars to grow your business. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brad. I'm from bradbrown.co, where I help business owners like you grow your reach and impact using online business. Just to give you a bit of background before I get into WebinarNinja as a platform. This is my second go round with WebinarNinja. I used it for the first time probably 4 or 5 years ago, and I wasn't a massive fan, if I have to be brutally honest. I've been following what Omar Zenome, who's the founder of WebinarNinja, has been doing for many, many years. He was one of the first podcasts I used to listen to, funnily enough, when I first got into this industry. He has a podcast, super successful podcast called the $100 MBA, and I used to listen to that podcast religiously. And when he launched WebinarNinja, I was at that time looking at hosting webinars to grow my business. And I wasn't really impressed with the sort of original version of WebinarNinja. I can tell you that it's improved a hell of a lot over the last few years, which is great news. And I also want to tell you that I'm going to be talking about WebinarNinja. If you are in the market for webinar software and WebinarNinja is for you, I'm going to be sharing a link that you can sign up. It doesn't cost you anything, and WebinarNinja will pay me a referral commission for sending traffic their way. But again, this isn't going to be a glowing review that WebinarNinja is the best platform available. One thing I will tell you is that there is no such thing as a perfect webinar platform. And I'm going to be telling you the good, the bad, and the ugly about WebinarNinja. If after this video you decide it is for you, great. If it's not for you, that's great too. So that's all coming up in this video. Just to give you some stats with regards to what we have done with WebinarNinja over the last 4 weeks. I've been using it on a weekly basis to, first of all, generate leads and drive people into a webinar where we've been selling a fairly high ticket item over the last 4 weeks and have had great results, if I have to be brutally honest. Just looking at those webinars, we've been averaging between 500 and 1,000, just over 1,000 registrants for each of those webinars. From a show-up perspective, I think the smallest webinar we did had just over 100 people live, whereas the largest one had 474. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag with regards to the numbers of people who have been on the webinars, but over the last month, we've had over 3,000 people register for this webinar that we've done. It's the same webinar that we've done every single week. So let me dive into what I absolutely loved about WebinarNinja. And they've changed this a lot from first time around. So one of the things about webinars is they can be extremely intimidating to set up and to host, particularly if you don't have a broadcasting background. So to set up, if you're not very techy, WebinarNinja makes it super easy. You can literally have your webinar set up within a minute. So all you do is you type in the title of the webinar, the time of the webinar, and it creates everything that you need. So it creates the registration page, the landing page that you can send traffic to for people to register. It creates the thank you page that you would redirect people to once they've registered. It then creates the series of emails that you'll send them, the welcome email with the registration or with the link, their unique link to the webinar. It does reminder emails in the build up to that to tell people, hey, don't forget the webinar is happening at the time your webinar is happening. And then the studio itself is really simple as well. You literally just enter it, and I'll go into what I loved about the studio in a moment. But then they've also got follow-up sequences. So they split and segment who came to the webinar and who didn't, and you can send a different set of emails to each of those two groups, which is fantastic. So for someone who's not very tech savvy, WebinarNinja makes it super easy to set up and host a webinar. Once you're in the actual studio itself, the thing I loved about it is everything is in one place. So many of these platforms, you need to screen share your PowerPoint presentation, and not everything is in the same place together, which makes it really distracting when you're trying to host a webinar to make sure that you've got all the moving parts together. And what I loved about the studio on WebinarNinja is everything is in together. So you've got chat functions, so you can chat to people before the webinar. What I like to do is have that chat roll going before the webinar, just to get a bit of banter going and find out where people were from. But then I closed that when I started the webinar because it does get a bit distracting and I'm a bit look squirrel at the best of times. But I left the Q&A, or the Q&A stays open. You can't close that. So that if there were questions, they popped up in the Q&A. And the nice thing is too, when you do get to answering those questions, you can click on the question and it timestamps it. So when someone watches the recording, they can go straight to the answers to that question. So we did use that functionality as well, which was great. The second thing that I loved about the studio is you are able to upload your slides into the studio. The thing I didn't love about that is even though you're uploading a PowerPoint presentation or a keynote presentation, it doesn't import the animations, if that makes sense. So if you've got bullet points that you need to flick through, each bullet point needs to be a new slide. So let's say you have a slide with 5 different bullet points that if it was in PowerPoint or Keynote, you could click through and it would slowly raise the next point up. It doesn't do that in WebinarNinja. So you have to export it as that one slide would have 5 different slides, if that makes sense. The other thing that I loved about WebinarNinja is your opportunity to make an offer, to create a product before the webinar and at the time that you want it to display on the screen. So you can set that time in before the webinar. So let's say 34 minutes into the webinar, your offer shows up, or you could do it manually. I'm not a huge fan of doing it at a specific time, and the reason being is we waffle a lot, and I want that offer to come up when we actually talk about what we're selling, and you are able to do that. The other thing that WebinarNinja does allow you to do as well is play video clips within your webinar. So you can upload a video onto YouTube and it plays that video in the webinar. We use 2 of those within our presentation, which work quite nicely as well. The only thing I didn't like about that is you had to flick between the slides and the video. So it broke the flow slightly, but you are able to do both of those, which is fantastic. I wasn't hosting on my own. I had a co-host, so we had 2 of us on the webinar, plus we had the slides, so we were able to flick around between screens, whether it was me on screen or my co-host or the slides. So that was quite nice as well. Then the third thing I loved about WebinarNinja. So the first one was obviously the ease of setting them up. The second one was where everything is together. And the third one was the email copy on the sequences that come with it. Our show-up rate was fantastic, if I have to be honest. I don't think we had one of those 4 webinars with a show-up rate of less than 40%. The first webinar we did was to our audience, so it was people who knew us, so the show-up rate was quite high because people knew, liked, and trusted us before they got onto the webinar. The final 3 webinars we did, which were by far the biggest audiences because we were running ads to get bums in seats, those were totally cold audiences, and our show-up rate was still over 40% for each one of those webinars, which was great. So the copy in those emails, we didn't even touch them in the welcome and registration sequence, and they work just fine for us. There's also then the follow-up sequences you can send to people who were at or on the webinar and those who didn't attend, and I will talk a little bit more about that. It's great that it's built in, but it's also one of the downsides, which I'll talk about in a moment. So those are the things I loved about WebinarNinja. Let me talk about the things that I wasn't a huge fan of. And just for total transparency as well, we are still looking for the perfect webinar software. We used it for a month. We paid however much it was for 500 attendees. I think it cost us close to $200. But it's not exactly what we're looking for. And I'll tell you the reasons why we are looking for something else and we're trying a different webinar software. So the first thing we didn't love about WebinarNinja was that there was no analytics on the emails. So as much as the emails were great and they were being sent, there was no way for us to track who was opening, what the open rates were, and what the click rates were. It's not a deal breaker for me, but I like tweaking and testing things to try and improve over time. And with no analytics on those emails, you can't really see what's working and what's not. The second thing that I didn't love about the emails is that there was no way to segment post the webinar for actions that the person had taken. So let me give you an example. We do the webinar and either somebody comes to the webinar or they don't. The follow-up sequences on WebinarNinja send it to either the people who arrived or the people who didn't. But you can send someone an email who didn't come to the webinar to watch the replay, and if they watch that replay, the messaging should be different down the line to someone who didn't come to the webinar and hasn't watched the replay. So we don't want to keep telling someone to watch the replay if they've watched the replay. We want to pitch them the offer, and there's no way to do that within WebinarNinja. There's also no way to take people who bought your offer out of those sequences. So if somebody comes onto the webinar, they loved the webinar, they've watched all of it, they purchased your product on the webinar, and because they got tagged as someone who was on the webinar, they get the follow-up sequence of someone who was on the webinar. So our follow-up sequence is like, hey, you enjoyed the webinar, why don't you buy our product? But if somebody has bought the product already, there's no way to pull them out unless you're doing it manually, which isn't great. So that's the other thing I didn't love about the emails. The third thing I didn't love about Webinar Ninja was their default landing pages. So they don't have too many templates. I think they've only got 3 or 4, but those pages were super slow. So if once your content is on it and you run it through Google PageSpeed Insights or Tooldem or Pingdom, the page speeds were really slow. And one thing that I've found over the years is the slower your page speed, the worse your conversion rate is. So particularly when you're paying for advertising to drive traffic to those landing pages, you want those landing pages to be super, super fast. So what I've done is I use ConvertKit as my email service provider. They have built-in landing pages that are super fast. But the problem is Webinar Ninja allows you to send leads or your registrants from Webinar Ninja to ConvertKit, but they don't have the reverse switch, if that makes sense. So you can't sign somebody up on a ConvertKit page and send their details like you can with a lot of other webinar softwares into Webinar Ninja. So it has to come from Webinar Ninja, which is a huge, in my book, a huge problem. I want those pages super fast, and unfortunately they're not. They do offer you an embeddable form that you can put on other landing pages. The downside with that is you can't put the form onto a ConvertKit page, so we had to build separate standalone pages on our website, which worked, but again, it wasn't the greatest of user experiences. The other thing that also happened, and this goes on to my next point, which is the platform was really, really sluggish. And what I mean by that is Webinar Ninja obviously has a lot of users and a lot of people watching webinars and attending webinars, and the times and dates traditionally when webinars happen, we found that the webinar platform was really, really slow. So trying to get into your studio at the time when you were supposed to do your webinar, our audiences, particularly in the US, and we do it late on a Thursday evening, which I'm guessing a lot of internet marketers do their webinars on a Thursday, sort of during the day or evening in the US, which is the same time we were doing it, and the platform had serious performance issues. So getting into the studio was a stress that I didn't need, and it was almost like it was hanging, like 20 minutes before my webinar was due to start, I couldn't get into the studio, and that happened a couple of times. It also, from a performance perspective, affected the quality of the stream. So the audio wasn't great. I mean, we've got great mics that we use on different platforms like Zoom and that sort of thing, and it didn't come across on Webinar Ninja, unfortunately. We also had a problem where we had to turn our cameras off to improve the quality of the actual audio and also the quality of the slides. I mean, we try to keep our slide decks as small as possible, not with lots of pictures or images, to try and speed it up a little bit. It got slightly better towards the end because we had realized that the first one we did, we really struggled. And I don't think we did one webinar over the 4 where there wasn't some sort of technical issue. And that was my co-host getting booted off halfway through a webinar, or people not hearing the audio, or people not being able to get into the room itself. And that for me is a huge problem. I love the fact that from a webinar host, the platform is really simple and easy to use. But from a user perspective, I want it to be that slick and easy for my registrant on my webinar, for my potential customer or my prospect. It needs to be that good for them. I can overlook certain things for me, but if it's not great user experience, the customer is not going to blame Webinar Ninja, they're going to blame my business. So that for me is really, really important. And I just found that the platform wasn't stable enough for our needs. We were doing some big ones. We want to scale this campaign. We'd like to get up to doing 1,000, 2,000 people on a webinar. And at 500, we felt that it was really sort of dodgy and not up to the standards that we would like. There are other platforms that are fantastically stable but are super clunky, and I think of GoToWebinar as one of them. So if you're looking for stability, like out and out stability, and you don't really need all the bells and whistles and the sexy stuff, Webinar Ninja is probably not for you. Go the GoToWebinar route. It is slightly more expensive, but from that point of view, I didn't enjoy that about Webinar Ninja. The other thing I particularly didn't enjoy, and I don't want to knock the business because I'm in business and I know sometimes things don't go your way, but every single week after the webinar, I contacted support with these issues. So people not being able to get into the room, or audio issues during the call, or my co-host getting booted off the webinar. And support never owned any of those issues. There were always excuses. And you know what? I understand no business is perfect, but I love businesses who own their issues. And I just found that Webinar Ninja didn't do that and left me quite disappointed from that point of view. But in saying that, as I said at the beginning of this video, no webinar platform is perfect, and you need to find the one that works for you. And I think there is definitely a use case for Webinar Ninja. It's not for our business, but I think there are a few businesses who could get a ton out of Webinar Ninja. And the first one, I think, and this is just my experience, I've used, I think, all the webinar platforms available to man. The thing that I think Webinar Ninja does better than any other platform, webinar platform, is it makes it really simple to set it up. So if you are not very tech savvy and you want a really simple solution to get webinars done, Webinar Ninja is definitely for you. I would suggest that you use it because it's not overwhelming. They make it so easy to create and host webinars. So that if that's who you are, Webinar Ninja is definitely for you. If you're looking for a total out-of-the-box solution that you don't really need to spend hours and hours sort of modifying and changing things to suit you, if you're looking for like literally click a button, 60 seconds later you've got a webinar up and running and you can be broadcasting within 5 minutes, Webinar Ninja is your go-to. There's no other platform in my experience that does it as simply as Webinar Ninja. If your follow-up sequences and automations in your business aren't that technical and advanced, and you don't mind the not separating emails, I don't think it's a deal breaker. Obviously for us, we want to really sort of dig into the weeds and figure out who's doing what. But if that's not you, then you don't need it. It's a nice to have, it's not a have to have. So I would definitely use Webinar Ninja if that's not a deal breaker for you. So overall, I think it's a great platform. Is it the best platform available? For us, no, it may be for you. Definitely check it out. The link to Webinar Ninja to check it out is with this video. If you're interested as well, I've created a post on our website as well as another video where I give you a 20,000 foot view of all the webinar platforms that are available to you as a business and which one that I think is the best. I'll tell you in that post and on that video. So you can click on the link that's with this video or on the screen right now. You'll be able to go and check that post out as well. I hope you found this valuable, and yeah, let me know what you think the best webinar platform is. If you wouldn't mind commenting in the comments below, let me know what you're using, what you love about it, what you don't love about it, and yeah, good luck on your journey, and we look forward to chatting soon.